Shalom. Shalom. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to continue reading in Matthew chapter 14 about the three fears. The first fear was King Herod, fearing that John the Baptist had come back to life and was the man Jesus. Fearing that the disciples didn't have enough to feed the 5,000. And here's the third fear. Jesus comes walking on the water, and the disciples fear they are seeing a phantom. So let's read, beginning in verse 21. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. And when the evening came, he was there alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat and the wind died down, then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret. When the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word to all the surrounding country. People brought all their sick to him and begged him to let the sick just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched him were healed. Now, this is a fascinating little section about Jesus walking on the water. Now, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat, go to the opposite shore from where they were, and then he went back up on the mountain to pray. Remember, he had heard about the death of his cousin John, and he snuck off to mourn, but the crowds found him. And rather than be upset and angry and bothered by this intrusion, he simply turned towards them, had compassion on them, taught them, and then fed them. Now he is done for the day. Everybody has finished eating. They've moved on. Jesus said, "I want you guys to get in the boat, go to the other side of the shore." Then he went up on the mountain top again, alone, to pray. Now, I believe he is continuing his mourning, is reflecting over his cousin John's death, and I'm sure in great prayer to God, asking what to do next. Prayer was a priority in the life of Jesus. If you go through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you find Jesus praying quite often, quite a lot. So he is mourning still, but he is also praying. Now, it gets up about somewhere around 3, 4 o'clock in the morning is this time frame here. And Jesus comes walking on the lake. Now remember, it's a stormy, windy lake. It's not like a massive storm, but the boat is going against the wind, so it's very difficult for them to get any distance. It's hard. And Jesus comes walking on the water like it's no big deal. Remember, we'd already read earlier in Matthew how Matthew took chapters 8 and 9 to demonstrate how the power of Jesus is over every single element of life and nature and disease and everything. Jesus even got into the boat and calmed a storm by simply saying, "Be still," and it was done. And it shocked his disciples. They were so shocked. They were wondering, looking at each other, what kind of man does this? So here's another example of Jesus walking on the water, overcoming all things about nature because he is in charge of all of nature. And as he's walking, the disciples look out and they see this. Now, in the Greek, it says in the English, it says they've had fear. In the Greek, it's a word that means they were shivering in terror. They were so frightened, they were shaking in terror. So they see this figure walking to them, and it terrorizes them. They're shaking and trembling in such fear, and they call it a phantasma is the Greek word, and that's the word for phantom. Sometimes it gets translated as ghost a lot of times in English, but it's a phantom. In other words, they think they're seeing an apparition, maybe an evil spirit. They're seeing something. Superstition always produces fear. Just like when King Herod thought that John the Baptist had come back to life. That was his superstition that made him scared of that. Superstition always produces fear. But I like the words of Jesus. Take heart. Now he says, interesting in the Greek, ego eimi, which is I am. Very powerful to think about that, because in the book of Exodus, chapter 3, verse 14, Moses asked the question, who shall I say has sent me? And God answers and says his name, I am. That's the name of God. Now in Hebrew, it is the letters Yahweh, Waheh, Y-H-W-H. No one knows how it's properly pronounced. Jews will not pronounce that name, deliberately not pronounce it, not because they are superstitious, but because they have a profound respect for the name of God. So they simply will not say it. They will substitute something else, something like Adonai, which means Lord. Or they will substitute the word Hashem, H-A-S-H-E-M, which means the name. They will use something to substitute so that, because in their profound respect for the name of God and the person of God, they do not want to become too familiar with God, as if God was my best buddy. They want to preserve reverence and awe and respect of God and his name. So they will not say his name. So nobody really knows how YHWH is actually pronounced. Yahweh could be the way it's pronounced. Yahweh may be the way it's pronounced. No one knows for sure. Okay? By the way, this Peter saying, if it's really you, then command me to come out to you on the water. So he said, yeah, come. Peter gets out of the boat and walks on the water for a little bit. And then he sort of looks around and realizes where he is, what's going on, the wind and the waves. And once he took his eyes off Jesus, he began to sink. There's a lesson for us, don't you think? Keep your eyes focused on Jesus. You won't sink. And then here's this beautiful thing. He cried out for help. And Jesus didn't chastise him and say, well, you idiot, you don't have any faith, so just go ahead and sink. No, he didn't do that. He reached down and grabbed him and pulled him out of the water. They both got back in the boat, by the way. Hebrews chapter 2, verses 16 through 18 describes how Jesus is able to help us in our time of need. Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 through 16 describe Jesus as our great high priest who is merciful and who will help us in our time of need. Turn to Jesus and you will find the help you need. By the way, once Jesus got in the boat, the wind ceased and the disciples worshiped him. Interestingly enough, they said this statement, truly, you are the Son of God. That's a very significant statement because it is the first time the disciples ever referred to Jesus as the Son of God. On the other side of the lake, by the way, crowds were waiting, crowds gathered, and Jesus healed. The people wanted to touch even the fringe of his robe. In the Jewish culture of the day, the fringe of the robe is called tzitzit. T-Z-I-T-Z-I-T, tzitzit. And it is a representation of the righteousness of the person wearing the robe. The tzitzit is a symbol of righteousness, and it's also a part of the prayer shawl called a talit that Jews wear over their head and over their shoulders. The fringes around it is called a tzitzit, and it represents righteousness. The people were trying to touch the righteousness of Jesus, and when they did, they were healed. Thanks for joining me.